Friends, welcome to the Epilepsy Innovation Conference. My name is Renee Roederer, and I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Community Care at the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan. And we are so glad to welcome you to this time in this experience of learning. Whether you have epilepsy or care for someone who does, whether you're a medical professional wanting to learn more in the field, or wanting to learn how to be innovative in your own community. In all these ways, we are so pleased to welcome you. And before we begin, I want to offer a special thank you to our sponsor for this conference, and that is Corewell Health. We're grateful for their support in extending this learning to you, and we know that their commitment to advancing epilepsy care supports our community and helps make opportunities like this so that we can all grow and learn together. Today's conference is designed to bring together new ideas, emerging technology, and real-world perspectives that are shaping the future of epilepsy care and support. And with that, we are so glad that you have chosen this time to learn with us, and we hope you enjoy your experience today. Well, welcome, friends. We are so delighted to have you here for the Epilepsy Innovation Conference, and we are so glad to offer this on demand so you can access it anytime that works for you. And I'm so pleased to begin this time with Dr. Evan Tank, uh, who is an adult epileptologist at Corewell Health West in Grand Rapids, and the medical director also of continuous EEG monitoring. And he's a clinical assistant professor at Michigan State University and board certified in neurology and clinical neurophysiology. So lots of wonderful things. Dr. Tank completed his epilepsy fellowship at the University of Michigan and is actively involved in clinical care, education, and research. And so, in addition to all those wonderful roles that I just named, Dr. Tank serves as the medical director and consulting epileptologist for multiple neurodiagnostic organizations and contributes to ongoing research and national presentations in epilepsy care and EEG monitoring. So he's a member, I'm so grateful for this, of our professional advisory committee at the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan. So Dr. Evan Tank, welcome to you. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Renee. Always happy to do this.
Amazing. And speaking of innovation, I'm excited for our topic today. Our title is Smarter Tools, Better Care. Innovations in epilepsy technology, super important. And so, while today's discussion is grounded in adult care, many of these technologies, of course, span across the lifespan, and we will also touch on how they may apply to pediatric patients as well, children and adolescents. So, wonderful. Let's just start with a general question. What are some of the most exciting technologies currently being used in epilepsy care? And what are you most excited about right now?
Yeah, so I think that the answer maybe varies from patient to patient because different epilepsies look different from person to person.
Right?
At Corewell West, we do a lot of epilepsy surgery for people who can't be controlled with medications alone. And a couple of technologies that we use that are just so useful and maybe not widely available, although there are a lot of other centers in Michigan where some of these things are available. One would be magnetoencephalography or MEG. MEG is a fairly sparsely available thing. I think there are two in the state of Michigan, only a handful kind of in the Midwest, where, if people are familiar with the idea that when you have epilepsy, you have some abnormal electrical activity in your brain. Anytime there's an electrical signal, it generates a magnetic field. MEG or magnetoencephalography allows us to measure a person's brain waves by detecting the changes in magnetic fields around their brains. It's a fairly simple, non-invasive thing that really allows us to better localize where their pathological brain signals are coming from. So people who have epilepsy and maybe need some kind of a surgical treatment, that's a really valuable tool for us to help figure out where exactly we need to kind of direct our focus for that type of treatment. People with any type of epilepsy can benefit from things like there are these really cool kind of wearable devices that are kind of seizure alert devices. They've been around for a few years. One is the Embrace Watch. There are other, things that work with your Apple Watch. People who specifically have convulsive seizures, who maybe don't recognize their own seizures. People who live alone, these have the ability to kind of let other people that they know be aware that the person with the watch may be having a seizure and can get help to them in that time. So that's been an amazing advance in the last few years. It's been helpful to a lot of different people. Um, there's some new medications coming on the market. One particular, non-medical, but also, kind of only barely surgical treatment that we're involved in a research study is implanting stem cells in a part of the brain where people have, you know, um, evidence on MRI of scarring or damage in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, where seizures often come from, and with the idea that these stem cells can maybe repair some of that damage there and treat people's epilepsies in that way. So that's something that hopefully really bears fruit and provides us with a completely different way to treat people with bad epilepsies. So there's a lot of stuff coming from different fields of technological advancement that really is doing a lot from all these different avenues to help us provide best care to patients.
Wow. And you think about where we were 50 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And so a lot is
Absolutely.
happening. Thank you. A lot of exciting things are
Yeah.
happening. And as we think about these, tools and technologies, as you were speaking there, I heard, some of these help with diagnosis. So they're like diagnostic testing. Some are about monitoring or alerting, and some are about treatment. So I'm wondering if you could break down a little bit about these categories and what some of those technologies might be.
Yeah. So in terms of diagnosis, that I talked about, that's a really important one. Another one that we utilize fairly often is something called SPECT, which is it's a nuclear medicine test. It's something that's performed in an epilepsy monitoring unit. And again, it applies to patients who have what we call drug-resistant epilepsy, who are being evaluated for epilepsy surgery. And the way that we do it, there are different ways to carry it out, but the way that we do it is we have a device kind of at bedside that has this radioactive tracer in it. And an EEG tech kind of watches from another room. And when a patient has a seizure, they push a button and it injects that tracer into their IV. With the idea being that when a seizure happens, the part of the brain where it's happening is kind of hyperactive. So it has these higher metabolic needs. So it draws more blood flow to that area. So that radioactive tracer gets preferentially taken up in that part of the brain. Go downstairs, we take a picture. And again, in 3 dimensions, it helps us visualize what part of the brain really is involved in that seizure in a way that EEG alone can't really help us determine. So that's a really important diagnostic thing. Um, One that's helpful for both treatment and for monitoring, not so much diagnosis, would be something called responsive neurostimulation, which we have a fair amount of experience with. Responsive neurostimulation, the other name it goes by is NeuroPace. That's the actual brand name of the device. It's an implantable device where after you determine, where somebody's seizures come from or what parts of the brain may be involved in the seizures, you implant some electrodes into that brain tissue, and then those are connected to this kind of battery pack and computer device that's implanted in the skull, below the scalp. And what it does is it more or less records your EEG. And it'll store little snippets of EEG with your help sometimes if you notice that you had a seizure or somebody who lives with you or is around you notices that you have a seizure. You swipe a magnet over it and tell the device, hey, store that snippet of EEG, something important just happened. And then over time, your epileptologist can review those little snippets of EEG and program the device to recognize when your seizures are happening in real time. And when it recognizes those, it can deliver an electrical shock through those same electrodes in your brain directly to the parts of your brain that are involved in that seizure to try to abort the seizure. Kind of like a cardiac defibrillator when somebody has a dangerous heart rhythm. So not only is it a treatment, but because it's kind of storing your seizures and And there's a method of uploading that to some, cloud so that we can review it. Over time, we can kind of trend how your seizures have been doing and see if they're, following any kind of particular pattern, can help us recognize triggers. And it's also just a really wonderful treatment device for people who again can't be controlled with medications alone, and maybe aren't candidates or aren't interested in other types of epilepsy surgery. So that's a wonderful device that helps us on a couple of different fronts. And there are, several other things. I could talk for hours and hours about this. But I know we have a lot of other things to discuss, and we'll get to some more of those.
But they're all so good, which I appreciate.
Yeah,
And
yes.
as you mention these technologies, I know at Corewell West and some of our other comprehensive epilepsy centers, we have some higher level diagnostic capabilities and also treatment possibilities. When should someone potentially see an epileptologist? Like under what conditions and perhaps visit one of these comprehensive epilepsy centers?
Yeah, great question. So, um, I think that it's really important the way that you phrase that. It's not necessarily the best to wait for your neurologist or your primary care doctor, whomever has been treating your seizures, to wait for them to refer you. So a great rule of thumb is if you have tried two different anti-seizure medications and you're still having seizures, then that is the definition for what we call drug-resistant or medically refractory epilepsy. If you're one of those people, you should know that the likelihood that any combination of medications, whether it's 3 or 5 or 8 anti-seizure medications, the likelihood that you become seizure-free with medications alone is less than 5%. So that's the point at which, if your neurologist or your primary care doctor is not sending you to an epileptologist, you should maybe yourself refer yourself to an epileptologist, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pursue any kind of a surgical treatment, but it's the time to get evaluated and kind of learn what those options are.
Yeah, wonderful. Which will give you access to a lot of these technologies and conversations
Absolutely.
about them. So amazing. You mentioned neuromodulation, and I'm curious, how do you determine which patients might be good candidates for, the vagus nerve stimulator, responsive neurofeed, or the RNS and the DBS, deep brain stimulation?
Yeah. So I think that anybody who meets that definition of drug-resistant epilepsy is a candidate for at least one of these types of devices. And just a broad overview for people who may not be aware, we talked about what RNS or neuropace is. DBS or deep brain stimulation is something that's very similar. It involves an implantable device that's kind of implanted in the chest wall, sort of like a cardiac pacemaker. And again, it has a couple of leads that go into a deep part of the brain that just and that has connections everywhere. Um, where it differs from an RNS is it doesn't read EEG necessarily. It doesn't deliver electrical stimulation only in response to seeing something abnormal. It just does it on kind of a regular repeating cycle, which is also a really beneficial treatment to people with epilepsy who can't be controlled with medications. Um, and then VNS is also very similar, a similar kind of implantation, except the wires go into a particular nerve in the neck that's connected to the brain. And again, it fires on a pre-programmed cycle. All of these things are fairly broadly applicable to people with different types of epilepsy. There may be a little bit of nuance in what's best for one person versus another. They all kind of have their own benefits and drawbacks, but they're all effective treatments. They're all safe treatments. And they can help pretty much anybody who needs something more than medicine.
That's really great. And are any of these especially helpful or maybe not as helpful across the age span, for maybe children and youth? Yeah, where do they fall in the possibilities for neuromodulation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so one of the important barriers is that the responsive neurostimulator and the deep brain stimulator are only approved for people 18 years and older. That doesn't mean it can't be implanted in somebody younger, but it sometimes means that there's a fight with the insurance company and they may or may not say okay. But it does sometimes get through, and sometimes a pediatric epileptologist is allowed to offer that treatment to a younger person. Um,
Amazing. That's really
I think what's
helpful. And
important, sorry.
oh no, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, I was thinking how I wanted to say this. I think just because it's not approved by the FDA necessarily for younger patients, it's really important to point out there are numerous studies that show that it's both safe and effective for those younger populations. So with each of those two devices, there are 20 plus research articles available that show that it's safe and it's effective. They're both safe and effective as treatments. VNS is available for much younger kids, widely available because it has an FDA approval down to fairly early childhood. So that's almost always an option and a good option. The other two are also great options, but maybe harder to get.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And I would say for anyone out there, if you're like, I've never heard of these devices, you can certainly talk to your doctors about them. Another place you might go is epilepsy.com. And speaking of innovation, we have a new, at our national office, a new chat bot named Sage who can give you information. You can just type in, like, I'd like to know about the VNS, and Sage will pull up an article for you, which is wonderful. So you can
So
learn more that way too. Wonderful. Can you share an example of how technology really changed the course of care for a patient?
yes, can I give you two ones real quick?
Great. Yeah.
So I was caring for a woman who had medically refractory epilepsy for 20 to 30 years. Um, and she was divorced. Her children were grown, so she lived alone. And her seizures almost always happened at night and were almost always generalized tonic-clonic or grand mal seizures. And so, as an epileptologist, the two things that concern us most about seizures are when they're grand mal seizures and when they happen at bedtime or from sleep. Those are the most dangerous types of seizures.
Sure.
So because this woman was kind of on her own, didn't have any kind of warning beforehand, and didn't have anybody who lived with her, she was especially vulnerable. We got her one of those Embrace watches, and she happened to be good friends with her neighbor. And she came in one day and said, "Hey, I have bad news. I missed a dose of medicine. I had a seizure, but my watch worked. It notified my neighbor. She came over, and my patient was in this, typical kind of post-seizure confusional state. She was being kind of destructive in her house and maybe engaging in some behaviors where she could have hurt herself. Her neighbor was able to come over and help her because she had that technology available to her. So that was just an amazing example. Another one's maybe a little bit of a lengthier story, but a younger woman who was adopted in early childhood from overseas, didn't really know much about her early childhood history, but had epilepsy for as long as she could remember. And she also had time seizures, also generally impulsive seizures. Um, we've done a number of EEG studies that weren't really all that helpful in localizing where her seizures were coming from. They just don't show up well on EEG, which happens sometimes. So she was somebody who we did one of those SPECT tests on, and it helped us identify maybe where her seizures were coming from. We then did intracranial EEG, kind of honed in on her seizure onset zone a little bit. It appeared that she wasn't a great candidate to have a surgical resection where we would actually remove the part of the brain where her seizures were coming from. So we implanted an RNS in her. And that one not only reduced her number of seizures by over 50%, I think 60% by the last time I saw her, but because she also was generally living alone and wasn't really all that great at identifying her seizures. And frankly, she didn't have great memory and she was maybe a little bit young and irresponsible. Having that data available helped me recognize how often she was having seizures because she wasn't always able to tell me herself. So a couple of really great success stories that I'm pleased with.
I love to hear those, right? And these really can make such a difference, and those are great examples of that. We're talking about some of the benefits of these tools, but what are some of the limitations or challenges, maybe especially for like the seizure detection devices? Any limitations or tool or challenges there?
Absolutely. So the way that the seizure detection devices work is generally they sense kind of those tonic-clonic movements in the same way that your smartwatch kind of knows when you're running or whatever. So if you have a different type of seizure, it's probably not going to pick up on that. It's fairly good at generalized tonic-clonic seizures, not so good at other types of seizures. The same is true of other different types of seizure detection devices. There are some, home video monitors that are kind of motion activated, or bed alarms, those sorts of things, which again are really helpful tools for certain types of seizures, but not all types of seizures. So they're not perfect. There are limitations with some of the other devices as well. We talk about the surgical kind of treatment devices. So specifically to talk about the RNS, the responsive neurostimulator. Um, it's most effective if you're able to, swipe that magnet
Hmm.
as you feel a seizure coming on. If you can't do that, or you don't have access to reliable internet so that you can upload that data, it's a small device that doesn't have a whole lot of memory. So we're not going to be able to see those. And that's going to make it much harder for us to hone your detections and make the device effective. And if you can't upload the data at all, it really may not be a good option for you. Um, some of the devices, there's some suggestion that maybe they might not be great for mood disorders. So specifically, a deep brain stimulator. The initial trials for that showed that people reported some worsened depression at the beginning of their treatment. It got better in time, but for somebody who has maybe a really severe mood problem, you may want to avoid that one. Um, Also, with that particular device, there were some initial reports of kind of cognitive disturbance, maybe some difficulties with thinking. Important to point out that patients did as well on cognitive testing before and afterwards, but kind of just subjectively, they felt like maybe they weren't as sharp as they used to be. So again, some of those things are really significant drawbacks. Some of them are kind of slighter drawbacks. Availability is always another one. So not every place has the capability to do the kind of intracranial monitoring necessary for a surgical treatment. Maybe not every place offers the same types of treatment. So just kind of your location and your access to care at a level 4 epilepsy center also can very much impact, what's available to you and what's not.
That's great. Are there any challenges that might show up differently for children, teens, or their caregivers, just from those perspectives?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. So, one thing that I think is an important distinction with kids, because children have such rapidly developing brains.
Mhm.
Kids who have early childhood epilepsy are generally much better candidates to have a resective surgery or like a destructive surgery where you use a laser or ultrasound to kind of destroy the piece of brain tissue that you think is causing seizures. Because their developing brains allow them to kind of develop compensation for that over time. Um, so as a kid kind of ages, those things become less and less of an option as their ability to kind of form new pathways and overcome those deficits becomes less and less as they get a little bit older. But because their epilepsies tend to sometimes evolve as they age, it can be challenging to offer some of those more specific surgical treatments, specifically something like an RNS. So if you're a patient who has, let's say, a disorder called tuberous sclerosis, where patients may have multiple different lesions around their brain, all of them are kind of capable, under the right circumstances, of generating seizures. What we find is that in time, some of those patients will have one particular area that seems to act up most often, and that seems to be where their seizures are coming from. If you do something to address that and control that, the seizures may move to another part of the brain.
Mm.
And so a treatment for somebody like that with RNS may not be as effective as another option. And that's something that, as an adult epileptologist, we don't see all that often. By the time people come to see me, their brains are mostly kind of mature and they are what they're going to be, with some exceptions. So that's an important consideration. We talked about the access, that's an important consideration. And then, again, just there are relatively fewer places for pediatric patients to get the type of care that adult patients can get. So that poses its own challenges as well in terms of just getting the right kind of diagnostic testing, whether it's the right kind of MRI or a SPECT or a PET scan or some of these kind of advanced imaging modalities. Not every place that's a level 4 epilepsy center for adults can offer the same services to pediatric patients. So all those things can be limitations.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for naming all of that. That's really important. And I would say for those who are watching at home, there are 7 comprehensive epilepsy centers for adults and 5 for pediatric patients in Michigan, and we can always get you connected to those spaces, right? Super important. But yeah, these are all things that people have to consider based on what they need and how their epilepsy is functioning, where they live, all of those things. So thank you. For families of children with epilepsy, how might they be thinking about these technologies as they age, right? Thinking about long-term care planning, that transition from pediatric care to adult care.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are probably two different ways to look at it, I think. And one would be if you have a child who is in need of this kind of advanced evaluation for surgical treatment, or just they have a difficult to control epilepsy, and you want to just kind of ensure that they're safe when they're no longer living with you. It's really important to kind of take hold of the opportunity to get some of these things in place while you're still managing their care. So things like seizure detection devices and seizure logs, and making sure that you have a thorough evaluation with an epileptologist, so you know what all their seizure types look like. Oftentimes we'll see patients come in to see us, and they will tell us, or their loved one will tell us, I have 4 different types of seizures. Sometimes my body does this, sometimes it does this, sometimes it does this. And we'll do some inpatient EEG monitoring and see, yeah, these 2 are seizures. This type of seizure is something else. And so it's important to know that stuff before they move on to their next phase of life, if it's not living with you or whatever. So getting all the information that you can is important. Seeing what kind of those ancillary kind of maybe wearable devices or alarms might be useful, to make sure that your children are safe as they maybe move out of your home. That's really important. And then to go back to the surgery piece, obviously if if you have the opportunity to be evaluated for epilepsy surgery, you should, because seizures are dangerous. And as time goes on, especially in a developing brain, the more seizures that take place, the more likely a patient is to have some long-term mood disturbances or cognitive issues. So I would never suggest putting that off. But what I will say is that sometimes you kind of go down one road with your pediatric epileptologist, and this is your treatment plan, and this is what you do. And then one day you kind of have to move on to your adult epileptologist. And that provides an opportunity to look at things with a fresh set of eyes and say, this is what you've been doing. It's gotten you this far. What if we consider doing this? So to have that conversation when you do make that transition to adult care and say, hey, you know what? I'm aware of these, treatment options, these other tests. Are these things that we should do? We hadn't done them before, but can we talk about it? So getting things in place and kind of establishing, gathering information as much as you can during those pediatric years is important. But then when you do move on, not just kind of resting on your laurels, and being kind of proactive and saying, okay, is there more we can do at this point?
Yeah, it's a good hinge moment to kind of reconsider and perhaps add some new things or raise some new questions, which is really wonderful. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in innovation for epilepsy technology in the next 5 to 10 years? Like what's in the pipeline? And I know we've been talking a lot about devices and surgical treatments, but if you want to talk about medication as well, you absolutely can.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about that stem cell thing. I'm really
Yeah.
excited and hopeful that that turns into something, because that could just be a game-changing treatment for a lot of
It's
people.
amazing.
Um, there are a lot of not just new medications, but new types of medications.
Mm.
So, to get, like, I guess, nerdy about it, but try not to be too scientific, for all this time, every anti-seizure medication we've had has done basically one of 2 things. One, it binds to a specific type of channel in your brain to kind of slow down how quickly it sends signals to other brain cells. Or 2, it kind of just globally suppresses brain activity a little bit, slows down firing a little bit to in a non-specific way, kind of slow down how rapidly brain cells are able to fire. Um, some pharmaceutical companies now have realized, hey, that there are other types of cells in the brain that we can target and see how we're able to modulate or change their activity in a completely unique way. And those are things that are being studied right now. And who knows what they're going to turn out to be. But I'm thrilled that somebody has kind of said, all right, let's start over and think about this problem in a different way. So hopefully in the next handful of years, we have completely different anti-seizure medications available.
I love
One of
that.
one of my frustrations as an epileptologist is if you if you look back at every anti-seizure medication we've had hit the market, maybe until the last most recent one, they've all been roughly as effective as the ones before it. So all these, millions of dollars going into research and the studies and whatever, and they're different medicines. Maybe the side effects are better or whatever. I don't want to say there's no value in new medications of the same sort, but we're not impacting the disease in the same way. So we have an opportunity to do something different, and that work is being done. And really, really am hopeful that it comes to fruition and gives us something unique and valuable.
That is so exciting.
Yeah, it
Because you're
is.
right. You think about everybody who has drug-resistant epilepsy, and well, maybe these methods don't work, but maybe another whole different method of treatment really could. So that is
Mhm.
absolutely amazing and incredible. Another thing I want to mention for people who are watching is that if you have questions about seizure detection devices, one of the best places to go is the Danny Did Foundation. They have on their website all kinds of information about the various devices that are out there. Because we know like these have a cost too, and we want this to be as accessible for anyone. They also have some grant support that can sometimes help with that. So definitely want to mention that as well. As we kind of get ready to close, if you had like one key message you'd want to tell patients and families, providers, like what would that be? This is the pep talk from Dr. Evan Tank.
Okay. So my message, oh, this is going to be rambling and verbose, but here we go. So my message would be, um, try to gather as much information as you can on your own using good resources like the Epilepsy Foundation, just so you are aware what's available, because sometimes you have to advocate for yourself. And if you're aware of some type of treatment, some type of test or whatever that you think may be beneficial, maybe it would be, maybe it won't be, but it's certainly not going to be beneficial if it's not performed. So bring it up to your epileptologist. If you're seeing a neurologist or a primary care physician, they're oftentimes very capable of treating epilepsy well, but sometimes patients are a little bit too complex for those specialties. And you need to advocate for yourself, get yourself to a level 4 epilepsy center if you're not seizure free.
Yes.
Um, so so be aware that there are other options out there. Try to read as much as you can, and just taking part in or being a part of kind of these social media communities of people with epilepsy. You hear about people's different experiences. Sometimes you hear horror stories, so don't you take everything with a grain of salt. But it's a good place to at least learn what's out there. And again, appropriate resources. I always send people to the Epilepsy Foundation to learn about things. Um, so you know what's out there and you know what questions to ask when you see your physician, and know that that's kind of a constantly evolving thing. So in the same way that I, as a physician, have to keep learning what's becoming available, you as a patient should try to do the same thing too, because you sometimes have to take the first step yourself.
And that is absolutely incredible. And it's just really exciting to think about how empowering it can be to ask new questions, whether people are doing that in the pharma world or in the clinical setting, or as you just told us so well, people asking new questions and taking those to their doctors and to the information they find. So, speaking of that, we are here for you. We have our Here For You helpline. You can call anytime. That number is 800-377-6226, and there are a variety of us that can answer questions or at least point in the directions that might be helpful. And so I want to thank Dr. Evan Tank. This conversation has been extremely helpful and I'm sure is raising new questions for people. And also, as we said, there are ways to get involved, and you get to be a part of innovation too, which is a great segue to some other things we're going to talk about today. How do you live in innovative ways when it comes to your epilepsy? So stay tuned for future sessions, and we're so glad to have you here. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another really wonderful conversation. And this one is titled Innovative Approaches to Supporting Independence. Every year, the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan chooses a challenge of the year, and in 2026, we are focusing on supporting independence. So, when we talk about epilepsy care, of course, we often talk about treatment, medications, devices, and seizure control. But we know that independence extends far beyond medical management also. So, independence is also about meaningful employment. It's about housing stability. It's about community belonging and much more. So, for many families, many individuals, it's about that question that quietly sits in the background. What happens also when a family is no longer here to provide support? None of us practice independence alone, thankfully. And so we support each other in that process, in the family and beyond the family. So we're not here simply to review what services currently exist, although that we are here to ask a deeper question today, too, which is what should innovation look like when designing systems around dignity, predictability, and long-term stability for everyone, including individuals living with epilepsy. So we'll explore employment, housing, and lifespan planning from a systems perspective today, and of course, through lived experience too. So my hope is that this conversation doesn't only inform, but challenges all of us to think differently about what independence truly requires. So, with that, I am so honored to introduce our panelists today, and they each bring a critical lens to what independence should look like across a lifespan. So, representing today disability advocates of Kent County, we have Judi Siegert, who is Home Accessibility Services Manager, and Nicholette Driggs, the Absolutely Accessible Kent Business Development Coordinator, whose work centers on advancing disability rights, access, and systems level change. Through advocacy, policy work, and direct community engagement, they bring deep insight into how accommodation and civil rights protections translate, or sometimes fail to translate, into meaningful independence. So, welcome. We're so glad for all the work you do. And today we also have Jess Ronne. We're honored to welcome Jess Ronne, the founder of the Lucas Project. Jess brings both professional leadership and lived experience to this conversation as a nonprofit leader serving caregivers with recognition and resources. Jess and her husband Ryan also created an innovative housing and support model called Hope Farm, rooted in dignity and long-term care sustainability. So, welcome to you also, Jess.
Thank
And
you.
then finally, we have Laine Richards with us today. Grateful to have you here. Laine is a compassionate advocate and emerging social worker based in Michigan, dedicated to supporting individuals and families through life's challenges. Her passion for advocacy is rooted in the deep belief that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. Laine also lives with epilepsy, so that experience informs her perspective. It doesn't define her, but is a part, and she brings both professional insight and personal understanding to her work, recognizing that epilepsy is just one part of a broader story. Offering perspective on independence truly means when you are planning not just for today, but for years to come. So I think having said all of that, we know this is an excellent panel and we're excited that you are here. So let's begin by exploring what innovation in independence should really look like, can really look like. So, Laine, I would like to start with you, if we may. What does independence look like in your life right now?
Awesome. Well, one, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Um, for independence in my daily life, I want to start with like what independence kind of means. So, when people think of independence, I feel like 9 out of 10 times they think, oh, you can do everything by yourself. You don't need any outside help. You live alone. You have a job, the basics. However, for me, and arguably most people with chronic illnesses in general, independence looks a little bit different. So, in my daily life, independence is more about being able to identify when do I need extra help, whether that be because I'm having kind of a bad medicine day. So, like when I say that, I mean lots of side effects, or just because I need a ride to the store. Um, it also means being able to advocate for myself when I need that extra help and just making sure those around me understand that sometimes something might take a minute longer or I might need a little extra support, and understanding that that's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just, kind of a thing.
Just what
Um,
is, yeah.
for me, being independent, it's not about being unaffected by my seizures, but about building life with my epilepsy. It's managing responsibilities, but also knowing how to adjust those responsibilities for my health. And it's not about doing things alone or never asking for help, but quite the opposite. It's about doing things together and knowing when to ask for help.
Yes. I love that, doing things together. And that is very much why we chose the word support, supporting in front of our challenge of the year, supporting independence, because we all need support in one way or the other, right? We don't do this alone, we do it together. As you think about independence at this stage of life, has anything been harder than you expected?
Um, For me personally, the hardest part of independence and living on my own as a college student has been asking for help and
Sure.
understanding that I'm not a burden to the people I love when I do need that extra ride or that little more time. And then another part of independence that's been hard, and I feel like this is a really big one for people with epilepsy, is transportation.
Yeah.
I do not have seizure freedom, so it's likely I won't be able to drive. And I am lucky enough to live in a walkable city. However, when I'm not home or I do need to go somewhere farther, transportation can be pretty difficult.
Yeah, yeah, I know that is such a common thing for so many people. And also Nicolette and Judy, as you hear Laine's experience and as you think about the experience that many people have in your own work, where do you see systems working right now, and where are some of the most common gaps?
I think the things that are working are that there are more deliberate strategies, to embrace these diverse, not necessarily challenges, just differences. I think, we're moving in the right direction. So I think that's working.
Yeah.
There are gaps, though.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of the challenges that we have, really, Elaine is right. Transportation is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
We don't have interconnected bus systems. We don't have county-wide bus systems. And so
Mhm.
you may be able to go to something across town, but you can't go to something in another town. And so not being able to have appropriate travel or having transportation that runs all day long. You may be able to get to something, but you aren't able to get home.
Right.
And so that is such a burden because if you aren't able to travel, you aren't able to go places.
Yeah.
And so, it makes it challenging to get out into the workforce, to go to school, to have meaningful interactions within your community. Also, housing is really challenging. Less than 0.1% of housing in the United States is considered fully accessible. And so, if we don't have housing that supports disability and we don't have transportation that supports people living with disability, our communities aren't ready to even house the people that live in them.
Thank you for mentioning that. That is such a huge, huge need. Absolutely. When we think about young adults in particular, are there supports you'd like to see that could make things more accessible for them? And I'll ask Judy and Nicolette first.
I'd like to see more wraparound employment supports.
Yeah.
I'd like to see employers that are disability ready, right? They've embraced what needs to be done to be disability forward.
Mhm.
I'd,
Yeah.
I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And as we think about that, what sort of myths, thinking about employment in particular, what sort of myths about epilepsy do you think still affect hiring and retention? Curious what folks think about that. Laine, do you have any thoughts on that?
I have quite a few.
Yeah.
I feel like one thing that people with epilepsy run into a lot is there's that misconception that when we're employed somewhere, we're a liability. While in reality,
Mm-hmm.
people with epilepsy can work just as safely as anyone else, especially if you're able to advocate for yourself, which is not an easy thing to do. Um, Unreliability also is a big myth surrounding epilepsy in the workplace because of epilepsy's unpredictability. However, I at least firmly believe this to be fact. Unpredictability does not equal unreliability.
Oh,
And
that's such a great way to say that. Thank you.
my personal favorite, heavy on the sarcasm there, is that all seizures are the exact same as what you see in movies and on television. You pass out, you shake, you wake up, which we all know is so untrue. And I think that ties back a bit to people with epilepsy not being able to work in an environment safely. It just kind of feeds that misconception. And the worst part about these myths is that not only do they affect the hiring process, but they reinforce so many negative stereotypes and make people afraid to disclose their epilepsy to their employers. And I've faced that fear myself in the past during interviews. And for lack of a better word, that really sucks.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's such a big part of my life and it's part of my identity. It's part of who I am. And it feels like I'm hiding myself in that situation.
Mm, Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, would anyone else like to speak to that or even just health conditions generally when they're unpredictable, right?
Yeah, the ADA is still a young civil rights law.
Yeah.
And so, many people have still were born prior to it, prior to the ADA, in 1990. And so we still have all of the, fear and biases of, just being fired because you have a disability, because it was legal until 1990 to do so.
Mhm.
And so much of a lot of the misunderstandings is people not understanding both what their responsibilities are as an employer under the ADA and what their rights are as an employee. And so if you have an employer who does not understand what types of reasonable accommodations are out there and what they can do, it will, you'll have that kind of pushback because they don't understand what their responsibility is. And then as employees, or job seekers, it can be really scary because we still know what happens when there aren't those legal protections for us. And so we have to advocate even harder because our HR or our companies maybe don't have that foundational education around accommodations for individuals with disabilities.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, for all the advocacy work that you do and all the education that you provide, employers and employees. So I appreciate that. Jess, I'm also really excited to talk with you and particularly about housing. And we know thinking about long-term stability and supportive housing for your son, that's been a really important part of your journey. And that's personal. And, the vision led not only to the creation of Hope Farm, a supportive housing community that you and your husband Ryan built for Lucas, but also the Lucas Project, which supports and uplifts caregivers through recognition and resources. So I'm just wondering if you can share when you're thinking about housing shifted from something that you thought, oh, I might do that in the future, to something you realized, oh, I really need to move on this. And what advice might you offer other caregivers who are asking some of those same questions?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me today. And my experience is a little bit different. I don't have any experience actually with epilepsy, but my experience is with caring for my 21-year-old son who will require full-time care for the rest of his life. And I think that shift started to happen for us as he started to go through puberty. He became much bigger and stronger. He's nonverbal. He does require assistance in every aspect of his life. And we started to see his aggression amp up, a lot of behavioral issues with his siblings, and just almost this desire in him to have his own adult experience. And that was really hard for me, as his mom, who had always promised him since he was like a little boy that I would always take care of him. He would always live with me. And then as he grew stronger and more opinionated, I had to allow myself grace to even change my mind and to start thinking through like other options. And honestly, that was a really long process. It was about 4 or 5 years, of researching and coming to an acceptance of, okay, just like my typical children, Lucas wants his own adult experience. So how are we going to make this happen for him? Because the waiting lists were so long, and because you don't have a lot of say in what that looks like as two healthy parents. We've been told that it's when one of you is going through a challenging period that your child is kind of bumped to the top of that list. And we didn't want to wait until he was 30, 40 years old. We wanted to get that transition in place for him when he was younger. So we started our research and we found a home and purchased it and ended up renovating it. And then you had a second part to your question about caregivers. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, just wondering what advice you might give caregivers who have some of those same questions, realizing that their child may need extra support in a housing situation moving forward.
Yeah, I would just say again, give yourself lots of grace. What may have worked in one season of life may not work anymore. And we went through that with meds, where I swore I would never give him meds. We were going to do every holistic thing we could possibly do. And then as he grew older and, he needed that support, I had to, consider other options. And meds actually were a game changer for him. And then the housing thing. So I think as moms, we get so stuck in like these nevers, and
Mm.
just allowing yourself grace, if you need to look at other options down the road, and just allowing yourself a lot of time to process and grieve because there will be such a shift in your identity as this full-time caregiver, for your child, and it's huge. But on the other side of that too is so much beauty and so much freedom for both of you.
Yeah, that's really, really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
What gaps in traditional housing models led you to realize something different was needed for Lucas and others who need that as well?
Well, the gap was there was nothing available.
That's a big
So we
gap.
were like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and we were told, again, well, you and your husband are healthy, so he's kind of at the bottom of the barrel. And if something were to happen to one of you, well, he might get pushed to the top of the list, but then maybe there's an opening, in the UP. We can't guarantee that it's going to be an opening in your county, and we were just like, that doesn't work for us. So um, that was one of the major ones. And then just deciding, let's figure out how we can purchase something, create a group home, choose those families, choose his friends who can live with him. Um, and yeah, I think that was just the biggest gap, really. There was nothing available.
And it's painful to know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question is, as you think about long-term housing and, the experience, Lucas having his own experience and others as well, like what does dignity look like in that practice?
Yeah, for him, it's not really about employment. And that's been an interesting part of our journey too.
Mhm.
We don't have the epilepsy, but the autism factor, and
Yeah.
he's, level 3 and has high support needs. And it was sort of this overarching idea that he could be employed, and he will never be employed, that his needs are just too high. So it was accepting that. And then,
Mhm.
in terms of that dignity, living in his own home, I think as long as he can continue to have purpose and meaning and outings and be able to successfully navigate the community, and going back to that transportation issue that everybody has referenced, that was very challenging for us too in that first year because we relied so heavily on public transportation in our rural community, which was challenging because there was like a block of time where they would show up 30 to 60 minutes. And so you're all kind of waiting there, to go on your outing. And then again, a block of time when the
Okay.
bus would come back. And that's challenging. So we did end up purchasing a vehicle for the home, and that's been a game changer. But, I understand that not everybody can do that either in their situation. And so just addressing those concerns. But yeah, as long as he can have that purpose and meaning and be surrounded by people who love him and he can get out into the community, I think that really brings dignity to his existence.
That's beautiful. And I think it's such an important reminder that employment is not the only way to have that, right? And that community life and that sense of access and purpose is just so, so important. So thank you for sharing. Laine, as you think about future housing you've now, housing long term for you, like, is there anything that feels clear and is there anything that's feeling uncertain?
Yeah, so when I think about future housing and just access to housing, the clearest thing where I'm like, this is number one, I need this, is access to transportation and walkability.
Mhm.
Like, as all of us have said more than once now, transportation is really, really difficult. And for me, I will likely never drive. I'm what's called medication resistant. So there's a good chance I'm not going to gain full seizure control. And because of this, the biggest uncertainty in future housing is that my support needs do change often based on my seizures, and living alone with that uncertainty definitely may affect my long-term housing. But that's not to say it's impossible or that there are no ways to work around or even with that barrier.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, these are good questions. And thank you for sharing from that experience. Super important. Also, back to Jess for a moment, too. Like, why do you think supportive housing is so difficult for people to access? What are some of those barriers do you think?
I mean, I think the ratios, there are so many who need supportive housing, and there's
Yeah.
just not enough supportive housing. I know with our situation, our goal was to create this model that we are hoping to even pitch to investors, to pitch to
Mm,
landlords who already have that tenant landlord relationship and explain, how it might be beneficial to transform some of their properties into supportive housing for individuals with disabilities. I just think there's a lot of fear around it still. Like, are there the additional liabilities if I were to offer this for investors and landlords? Like, what does that look like? Not really understanding it. It is basically just that tenant landlord agreement. And there's not, any other massive amounts of liability that you're taking on. And I think there's this fear too of the extra expenses that will have to be put into the home to make it ADA compliant. And there's just a lot of fear of the unknown, I think.
mm,
And I know our goal as a couple that has accomplished this now is to try to educate more people into looking into either creating this for their loved one or to be able to pitch it to landlords and say, hey, consider doing this. It would be highly beneficial to the community. And, you're still making your rent or the money that you have to make it worthwhile. So, yeah, it's just going to be a long process.
long process, yeah. And I think that's so important, right? Helping people know like this is a consistent need. I mean, it really is. And I also am wondering, Judi and Nicholette too, like why do you think all this long-term planning often falls on the individuals and families rather than the larger systems itself? Like what are some of those barriers, do you think?
I think some of it is just the complexity of the system overall. I mean, even it's complex for anybody to do any kind of long-term care planning regards to health, housing, long-term, or even, when say an elderly parent has a change in their abilities, then that is very hard to navigate. So imagine, the complexity of the system overall, right? I also think that there's just a lack of a comprehensive public policy framework about long-term planning needs in general. And I just think there are so many gaps there that need to be addressed. I'm not sure where the first step is to that, but I think more awareness is a great place to start.
Well,
Yeah.
and also we aren't like in the United States, we aren't the type of society where we have that multi-generational living. That's not our standard. That's not our norm. And so there's the lack of support for that because that's not a cultural norm for
Right.
us.
And we're reactive instead of proactive
Exactly.
in general.
And so we're not planning for this because as a society, we see it as a personal problem and not a
Right.
societal problem.
Mhm.
It's looked at with the like medical model that it's the
It is.
individual and the family that has the problem. They need to fix their own problem. When it really is, we have communities in a society that's not built for everyone to be an active participant.
Yeah,
And
gracious. Yeah.
so families end up having to do this on their own with a lack of understanding because they don't know what resources are out there because it's not as openly shared.
Mm-hmm.
So it falls back on to the family who doesn't always have all the resources available or know what's out there to be able to plan with the best informed way.
Mhm.
Right. And I think for so many families, like you don't know about this until you have to know about this, right?
That's right.
And that is so challenging. So I appreciate everything you all are doing to raise this awareness and these questions, right? Because any one of us could end up needing this. Like, yes, our children, but any of us, right? And I think that's just really, really important. So I'm wondering too, what policy or system level changes would be most meaningful to improve outcomes? I know we don't always know where to start, but what would you love to see? And I'm just going to open that to anybody if anybody would like to share.
So I think something that we often forget is that there hasn't been a lot of changes to the ADA since it was passed. And the ADA was based on the bodies, the equipment, and the society of the 1970s and 1980s.
Yeah.
And so another thing that is kind of a misconception, one, that buildings are grandfather claused in. That's not a real thing.
Yeah.
But it's
I
often
find that
something
out,
people
yeah.
say. And it's like, no, you do have to make these changes.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, the ADA doesn't cover private residences. So when people are building homes that are private residences, the ADA doesn't have any jurisdiction over that. And so we aren't building accessible homes because there's no requirement to build these accessible homes. And so then when you get into apartments and other multi-complexes, there are some regulations for that, of course, but those are really just the bare minimum.
Bare minimum. I was just
Bare
going to say
minimum.
that they do what's minimal compliance, and they check the boxes and feel like, okay, we're compliant, and that really does not fit everybody's needs. It doesn't,
and it's unsustainable. And so if you are building spaces that aren't accessible to all potential residents, you're going to have to go back and fix them. And so I think we do need some updates to building codes, but also an update in education.
Yes.
For builders, for designers, for even real estate agents, to know what to look for to best help their clients.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're talking a lot about younger people today, which is super important, but we also have like an aging boomer population. And disability is an identity any of us could end up in, right? At any time. And so how important it is to have all of that access, and especially for, people that are younger adults moving into needing this long term. So I think that is really great. And anybody else want to speak to that? Public policy dreaming or changes? Yeah.
I think we have sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We'll go Jess and then Laine. Go ahead.
I think we have a lot of work to do around the staffing too. I know, a lot of people are like, okay, I can buy a house and we can renovate it and we can make a home for our child. And I'm like, you know what? You can have this $2 million fully accessible, beautiful home. And if you can't partner with a high quality home health care agency that can provide the staffing for your home, you just have this beautiful $2 million home that serves no one. And I know we have a lot of work to do around the staffing. I know even in our home, we have a wonderful home health care agency that we work with, starts their employees at $20 an hour. We've been able to recruit and retain, recruit and retain amazing staff for the first 2 years, but there still are gaps And I know that the staff really struggles sometimes because we do have two individuals that live in the home that do require one-on-one at all
Mhm.
times. And those ratios don't allow for that one-on-one care when they go out into the community. And I know that's kind of an extra stressor on the two or three staff with the four residents because they don't have the staff really needed to support that population. So I don't know. I am not very knowledgeable in what exactly those policies would be. I just know that we definitely need to see some policy changes around the staffing crisis.
Yeah. So if anybody's watching this and you're a like policy wonk, we need you. Right? Laine, what were you going to share?
I was also actually going to touch on the ADA, but more from an employment standpoint.
Mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm.
while of course we do have laws that protect us from discrimination in the workplace, like the ADA, unemployment rates with people with uncontrolled seizures are significantly higher than those with people who's have full seizure control. Um, and as I mentioned earlier, policies frequently are not preventative and don't account for unpredictability. So I think having policies and laws or shifting current policies and laws that account for the unpredictability would be so meaningful to not just people with epilepsy, but everyone with a disability. And then I
Mhm.
think continuing to educate people on seizures and what seizure safety is. Like I know the foundation has been doing so much work on seizure safe schools. I think requiring that first aid training in schools would be, or at least should be,
Mm-hmm.
semi-simple to enact and would decrease misunderstanding surrounding epilepsy. And that itself would have a domino effect of decreasing
It
discrimination
would.
that the 1 in
Yeah.
26 regularly face.
Absolutely. Yes. And so 1 in 26 people will be diagnosed with epilepsy in their lifetime, and many of them are children. Right here in Michigan, we have 14,000 children diagnosed with epilepsy. And you're right. They need to be safe at school, in the classroom, in the lunchroom, on the bus. And it's so important. And as you said, the more we train in that context, we do also train in other contexts, but the more we do that, it has that domino effect. It's amazing. The last thing I'll say on policy, and of course, this is what everybody would say with needs, but we need funding to do this, right? Not everybody has the ability to do this as a family. Not everybody can pay for staff, let alone housing, right? And so that support needs to be there, and it's just really vital. So we encourage anyone to partner with us on this, which is great. Another question as we think about lifespan planning and also systems, like if independence planning started earlier, what do you think would be different? Yeah, Judi and Nicholette, do you want to start with that one?
Oh, I was thinking about this quite a bit. I
Mhm.
was thinking more in the terms of employment, but as far as overall independence
Mhm.
planning, I think if you have to have some self-discovery and some customized goals right from the get-go and forward thinking, in general, probably not super helpful to, make it that broad, but it's a someplace to start.
I
Yeah,
think
absolutely. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so much of the stigma around disability is really, I think, what makes it hard to plan early. Um, we don't talk about death in
Mm-hmm.
the United States in the same ways that other places do. And so if you don't want to think about what's going to happen at the end of your life, it's really hard to plan for it.
Right.
And it's really hard to plan for other people um, for the future if you aren't ready to think about what the end of your life might look like. And so having open conversations about people's abilities, what they want to do, what they're able to do.
Mhm.
Um, and it can be challenging because we do have an idea of what our lives are going to look like, right? And that can be challenging when something happens that kind of alters what we think our futures are going to look like. And so I think a lot of it goes to some resiliency training when we're younger and helping us build up that skill set to be able to tackle some of these really hard things later on. But also the supports, right? Having schools have full supports, having social workers, having medical professionals, having counselors and things that can help not only the students as they're transitioning through school, but the families around them, their parents, other caregivers, having children have a better understanding of what disability is so they can be better adults when it comes to disability. And so that next generation isn't being taught the bad habits of the one before.
So good. Thank you. And just something I love that you said was just letting like the goals for Lucas change and pivot, right? And I think starting early, sometimes it's a change, right? When something different emerges, but also to create that nimbleness, right? So how might you answer that? Like if independence planning started earlier, what might be different?
Well, I think there'd be more acceptance. And just to sort of piggyback off of what Nicolette said, as a mom, there was a lot of judgment um, towards me in
Mhm.
sort of abandoning Luke to his own adult experience. And that's very typical. So there's kind of this stigma around even families who do look into that long-term housing option for their loved one. And I think if we could have more of those conversations, we would bring more of that awareness about what that looks like and how it can be done beautifully and purposeful and work through that grief because there is a grief, there's an identity shift, and then there would be acceptance at a much earlier stage for your child to go into that supported living environment rather than waiting until he or she is 35, 40, 45, and you physically cannot care for them anymore because of your own health issues or death. So just continuing to bring that awareness, to have those conversations, to remove that shame from parents and individuals who are looking at other options.
Yeah, that is such an important perspective, and I know one that you've lived and many families have lived or are living now. So thank you for raising that. I appreciate
Mhm.
that. I want to come back to employment for a moment because we talked, Laine, I think one of the things you said so well is that we need to be able to account for unpredictability, right? And kind of intermittent needs. And so if you could redesign employment supports to account for unpredictability in a person's disability, like seizures, but it could be anything, what might you change or what could that look like?
Oh, goodness. There would
Yeah.
be a few things.
Yeah.
Um, One, again, I think just educating people, like educating employers on what epilepsy is. It's not just the you pass out, you shake. It's a
Mhm.
lot more than that. Educating them that unpredictability isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like I said earlier, it's not necessarily a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just kind of a thing that happens.
Yeah. And
Um,
as you said, not unreliability, which I really loved. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, I think that would be the most important, just finding a way to make employers understand more that different isn't bad, it's just different.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And for Nicolette and Judi, I know you work with people who have a variety of disabilities, and
We do.
epilepsy is certainly one that has, the symptoms may shift and have some unpredictability, but that's true for a lot of people with disabilities. So, how do you educate employers on that?
Well, here at Disability Advocates, more than half of our employees have some form of disability. So we have an inherent flexible work model, right? And the environment is designed to accommodate a lot of differences. And there's that customized, it's basically a customized day, and everybody is very productive and very employable for sure. And it's just been that education here. I mean, everybody here has this shared understanding and shared experience, so that's helpful. It's inherent, but that's not realistic everywhere. But it sure would help a lot if there were uh, policy and mandated education to understand and embrace these, that it's everybody has something, and it's just part of the workplace. It's part of your workday. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, you're like a shining example of that, which is awesome.
Did
Yeah.
you want to say something about
Yeah.
that?
So, kind of looking at the stats for disability employment.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to the pandemic, we were really hovering around 19% employment for people with disability.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just
So,
criminally low.
yeah.
And with, some of the options during, the lockdowns with the pandemic, people had other abilities. We had to make it work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so coming out of the pandemic, we were at like 34%, 38%, hovering around those. But now we're starting to see a dip. And
Ugh.
it's because we're losing some of those flexibility, those flexible options. People are going back into the office and they're eliminating their work from home options. And so we're falling back, like I said before, into those bad habits. And so the different types of support would be to really be less rigid with what we expect work to look like.
Yeah.
People work in lots of different ways. When we're young, we talk about all of our different learning styles, right? Some people need to see it. Some people need to do it. Some people need to hear it. Some people need to read it. That doesn't change when we graduate from high school. We're still the same people, right?
Right.
And so as we are transitioning into the workforce, having employers who understand that people work differently. I am a person who has an unpredictable disability. And so having flexibility, some days I can work a 10-hour day. I just plug away and get everything done. There are other days where I can't get out of bed. And so, and like Laine said, it doesn't mean that I'm unreliable. It just means that my health is unpredictable.
Yeah.
And it's not a personal failure. It's just
Right.
a part of the human condition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is, it's like the curb cut effect. When you make those curb cuts for wheelchairs, guess what? Everybody benefits. People with strollers, people who, use other mobility devices, people who, deliver packages, all sorts of things. And this is the same kind of thing. When you have flexible work, people with disabilities certainly benefit, but guess what? So does everybody, right? And so it just kind of lifts it up for everyone. So I appreciate that. I would like to ask this big dreaming question, which is, what would need to be true in 10 years to say we improved independence for people with epilepsy, people with disabilities? What would need to be true? And would love to start with you, Jess. Like, how would you answer that?
Mm, I would say any family that wanted to look at a housing option for their loved one would have that option.
Yes.
That would be a really big dream, and it would take a lot of money, a lot of homes, and a lot of and figuring out the staffing issue. But if a family was ready to make that transition, or the individual was ready to make that transition, that there was the appropriate housing ready for them to move into.
Yeah, they would say we did it. Yeah, that's what we want. That's awesome. Our friends at Disability Advocates for Kent County, what would need to happen?
I would say solid disability confidence in the workplace. So all employers feel confident about having someone with any kind of disability employed by them.
Mm-hmm.
No question.
No question.
Well, and fully funded social services.
Yes.
How do we have independence
Yeah.
if we don't have healthcare, if we don't have transportation, if we don't have housing, if we don't have meaningful ways to interact within your community, whether that is through education or community involvement, volunteering work? If we don't have access to those things, we cannot have independence.
Yeah.
And so making sure that we have transportation that runs round the clock as many places as we can go. Employers who understand that people with disabilities are just as qualified and are just as productive. And you know what? Maybe we're a little bit more innovative because we have
Had to innovate. Exactly.
And really removing those stigmas, removing the biases and the negative language we have about disabilities in our communities.
Absolutely.
Having people, we've had a big resurgence of things like the R word, and the belief that people with disabilities are less than, and it's just not true. Having a disability doesn't make you less than anybody else. It just means your body works differently, your brain works differently.
Yeah.
And so really, moving away from that stigma, I think will have such a broad impact on the lives of really all people with disabilities.
Yes, 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 yes. I appreciate that pep talk, and that's absolutely true. And we none of us has independence without it being supported, whether that's,
Mhm.
in our system-wide supports and community supports. That's super important. Laine, how about you? What would we need to do to say, oh, 10 years from now, we improved it?
Um, in my head, in 10 years for us to say like we've improved independence, it's going better. The first thing I would say is kind of touching on the policy is people with epilepsy can confidently say systems around us support our lives because like we were talking about earlier, they protect us to an extent, but that doesn't necessarily mean they 100% give ongoing support. Um, I would also say in 10 years, if we've improved independence, there's going to be a lot less stigma around disability and epilepsy. Um, Nicholette and Judi, I'm basically copying you guys right now.
We're all saying yes, 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 yes.
And another big thought that I have is I like a lot of people with epilepsy and a lot of different disabilities have really struggled asking for additional help because I feel like there's just a big stigma in our culture about asking for help. You need to do everything on your own. You need to be self-sufficient. Um, I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think being able to ask for help proves independence rather than takes it away. And I truly believe we will have greatly improved independence when there's less shame around asking what we need.
Yes, yes, yes.
Amen. Mhm.
Yes. And caregivers deserve that too, right? To be
Oh, yeah.
supported and to not be in a silo. And so, bit by bit, as I've heard all of you today, among other things, we're all talking about shifting that stigma and that sense of being isolated, right? And thank you for your words and your vision, because I think as people are watching this today, they feel less alone and a little bit more supported, and that means the world. So, as we close here, I just want to say innovation is not only about new programs, it's about redesigning systems, culture, right? That anti-stigma perspective, and building up dignity, autonomy, and sustainability. So, employment is about more than placement. Housing is about more than availability, but it is about those things. And planning, needs to begin before a crisis, ideally. So we're all here to support each other in those things. Um, and, also independence is not just for caregivers to have to figure out by themselves. That's so important. So the future we described today is one that we want to be vital and present, and we're so excited. So for people with epilepsy, families, people with additional disabilities, we just hope you feel supported and that you're not asking hard questions alone. And so for professionals, policymakers, that call is clear. We need to be moving on this, and independence should not be a privilege, but something that everybody can access together. So thank you for your support. And I also want to mention that encourage you to look into these wonderful organizations, the Lucas Project, the Disability Advocates of Kent County, and very proud of you, Laine, and all the work you're doing, moving towards social work. And I know you are going to be such a vital person and already are for so many people. So we'll have a slide to also show you those things. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for our panelists. We appreciate you. Everyone, take care.
Well, welcome to session 3 of the Epilepsy Innovation Conference. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's session focuses on an important and often overlooked challenge in healthcare, medication discrepancies across systems, and how innovation combined with patient advocacy can help close those gaps. We'll explore how artificial intelligence is being used to improve medication reconciliation and how lived experience is shaping safer, more coordinated care. Medication safety is a critical issue, especially for individuals managing complex conditions like epilepsy. This session will highlight how emerging technology and patient-centered advocacy are working together to address these challenges. It's my pleasure to introduce today our speakers for this session, Shannon Biergans, board certified family nurse practitioner, patient advocate, founder of Advocate LLC, and Kevin Biergans, graduate student at the University of Notre Dame, director of growth for Advocate and LLC, and consultant with TheraCare AI. So would you like both just to tell a little bit about yourselves and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks for having us today, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be with you and with the Epilepsy Foundation. Part of the reason that I started Advocate, an independent patient advocacy foundation, is because over the course of my 25 years in healthcare, I saw just how little of a voice a patient actually has in their healthcare journey. And it was important to me to take a new role in helping empower patients with the knowledge I had gained through my personal experience being a provider in the healthcare system and give that to them to empower them to have a voice in their healthcare. It's a pleasure for me to be with my son today, representing TheraCare.
Yep, as Shannon just said, my name is Kevin. I'm representing Leap of Faith Technologies, which is a company with a mission to improve the patient experience when it comes to medication reconciliation.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. Much appreciated. And I wholeheartedly agree with what you were saying, Shannon, as far as the medication and the advocacy for people and helping them have their voice. That is so much of what we do here at the foundation. So again, I think this all aligns so wonderfully with the work that we do. All right, with that, I'd like to turn it over to you both to share more about your work with your presentation.
Epilepsy is near and dear to both Kevin and myself. My aunt, who was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was a toddler, actually her seizure activity wasn't controlled as a toddler, and unfortunately, it resulted in a cognitive disability for her. She is truly a joy and a great love to our family. And it is through one of her experiences with the hospital system and having to go to the ER that really highlighted for me, as someone who loves her, just how important it is for patients to regain their voice and have control over medication reconciliation within the hospital systems and within all EHR systems. So Christy lives in a group home. We have an accurate typed up medication list for her that has all the due diligence in creating this list. I'm a nurse practitioner and my mom's a nurse, and we knew this was important. So this was in place in her group home. She had an event which led to a 911 call that took her to the emergency room. Her staff at the group home provided the typed out accurate medication list and sent that with her to the hospital system. And when you get to a hospital system and you hit that triage point or intake part of the hospital experience for ER or whatever your surgery, whatever the case may be that's led you to the hospital, it's usually a support staff, a medical assistant, a patient care tech, who is taking your medication list. For Christy's case, it was a typed out, accurate list. For some people, that can be a handwritten list. It can be verbally given to that patient care tech or medical assistant. And there is great room for transcription errors to happen. Christy was, a hospital system is loud, and there's just lots of points where medications can be entered incorrectly. You as a patient really don't know what that person is entering behind the screen. So Christy was admitted. She stayed there for 3 days. We were not able to be there with Christy 24 hours a day. We would go and visit her, but oftentimes our visits did not correspond with when nursing was coming to give her medications. I naively thought, because we had an accurate medication list that was in the EHR system. And I'm embarrassed to say that as a provider, a lot of times that I thought medications were wrong in the EHR systems that we're looking at was because the patient hadn't brought a correct medication list and they didn't really truly know what they were on. And it was through my experience, personal experience with Christy, that I saw, despite providing this accurate med list, when she was discharged, we were looking through her paperwork and there were multiple medication errors listed on her medication list in her discharge summary. The most significant of these was one of her epilepsy medications, Depakote. Her Depakote was supposed to be given 1 tab twice a day. And while she was in the hospital for those 3 days, it was given 1 tab 3 times a day. Now, fortunately for Christy, this did not result in adverse outcomes for her, but it certainly could have. And more, other medication errors, prescribing a drug that sounds like another drug. Maybe one drug is for blood pressure, but this one is for allergies, and you misput the one that's in the record, could have had really serious effects for her and other patients. So what happens is when these medications get listed, really the provider there, unless they go into the room with the patient and go through that medication list line by line, like myself as a provider, the assumption is that what was in there was correct, and it truly wasn't correct. So this is a risk for patient safety. And it also takes time away from the providers who are actually providing the medical care for the patients. It takes time away from them. And that's often why a provider doesn't sit there and go medication by medication, because they've got to triage their time and focus on the most time-sensitive matters in regarding your care. And medications often fall to the bottom of that, unfortunately. So how does this relate overall to what we're seeing in our healthcare system? We've talked about how transcription errors can happen. There's medications like hydralazine and hydroxyzine, which sound very similar. One is for high blood pressure, one is an antihistamine. If these were, misheard, or a handwritten note wasn't legible, these could be confused and put into the EHR system. The other thing is EHRs have on their drop-down menus, if you type a medication, what will happen is a drop-down will happen that will have the most typical directions for that medication. Sometimes it's a staff member will click that, not verifying that that isn't the way the patient is taking it. Because we do know care should be individualized, and we don't all take the medications the same way because our bodies are different. So sometimes that's what happens. The bad part right now is that you as the patient have no idea what's being entered into that EHR system. You are a face on one side of the screen, and the person entering your information is the face on the other side, without you ever knowing what's being put in there. The doctor receives that medication list when you're in a hospital. He generates orders that go to the hospital pharmacy. The hospital pharmacy packages the medications, and the medications are sent up to the nursing staff to dispense to you. If you are cognitively impaired, or if you are not, you don't have all your wits because you're vulnerable, you're in the hospital, something medically has happened to you, and you're not challenging the nursing staff every time they give you your medications to make sure they're right, you're never really going to know that medication errors are happening behind the scene until it's too late. The U.S. Pharmacists Association estimates that at least 1 medication error occurs per patient every day in the hospital. That equates to roughly 1.5 million patients being harmed each year due to medication errors. TheraCare AI is providing a model that addresses this problem directly.
At its core, TheraCare AI gives patients a way to build a verified, accurate medication list that reflects what the patient is really taking at home. This list is the patient's source of truth, and this list gets compared directly against what's recorded in the EHR systems. The app generates a clear report that color codes every medication as matching, mismatched, or missing entirely. So instead of a provider walking into an appointment blind to those errors, they have an accurate picture in front of them before any decisions get made. It's a simple concept, but it's one that can genuinely prevent some of the kinds of errors Shannon just described from ever harming a patient. So let me show you exactly how that works, starting with how you add your medications into the app in the first place. If you've ever tried to manually type out a medication name, you know how complicated they can get. And one small typo can mean the difference between the right medication and the wrong one entirely. That's why TheraCare lets you scan your pill bottle directly with your camera. Once you scan the label, the app's AI automatically reads it and extracts all of the key medication details. From there, it pulls verified information from First Data Bank so you can review exactly what that medication is and why it's being taken. After you confirm that, the medication is added to your active list where you can manage notes, schedule reminders directly in your device's calendar system, and take actions on each one. Once all of your medications are added, TheraCare helps you build what we call as a med baseline. You review each medication one by one, confirming the details, associating a health problem, and adding any doctor's notes you have with there. Once everything is reviewed, the app saves a complete snapshot of your medications at that point in time. What's really powerful is that you can track these baselines, so if your medications ever change, you always have a record of what you were taking and when. And when you need to share that information with a doctor or specialist, you can download and export the whole thing as a clean PDF report. So now that you have your verified baseline locked in, this is where everything kind of comes together here. You start by pulling in EHR records from multiple health systems and uploading those documents directly into the app. The AI then reads through those documents and extracts all the medications listed. From there, TheraCare automatically compares what's in those EHR records against the verified baseline that the patient previously built. Within seconds, you get a comparison report that clearly shows you which medications match, which ones have discrepancies, and which ones are missing from the record entirely. For patients managing complex regimens across multiple providers, like many in the epilepsy community, this is a huge game changer. Medication errors are one of the most preventable patient safety issues in healthcare today, and TheraCare is giving people the tool to finally do something about it. So right now, TheraCare is available to download for free on both iOS and Android. Getting started is a simple process. You can just scan the QR code for your platform and download it directly from the App Store or Google Play. Once inside the app, you'll find details, instructions that walk you through exactly how to set everything up and navigate each of the features. If you ever have questions along the way, TheraCare has a built-in AI agent that you can ask anything, whether it's a specific medication question, a potential interaction, or how to use a feature within the app. Leap of Faith Technologies is consistently improving the experience by regularly pushing out updates that refine the workflow, they sharpen the AI, and address any bugs along the way. So the app you download today will only be getting better and better.
I think Kevin touched on a point how they're making all these updates to the app. And I feel very fortunate to represent the patient and patient advocacy along with TheraCare because they have graciously allowed me to give my insights in how a patient experiences the healthcare system, how a provider experiences the EHR, and what the barriers are between those relationships, and how patient advocacy, along with apps like TheraCare AI, help to bridge that gap so patients regain their voice. So the future of TheraCare and EHR is really exciting. I had the opportunity to attend the HIMSS conference, which is a major health information technology conference, and went along and had discussions with some of the big EHR players in our hospital and healthcare systems. So Epic, Athena, Meditech, ECW. I think what a lot of patients don't understand is that every hospital system you go to or provider probably has a different EHR. So the medication list that is in Epic at Sparrow or Henry Ford could be completely different than the medication list that is entered in ECW or the McLaren Health Portal. And these systems don't currently talk to each other. So TheraCare AI is in conversations with these EHR platforms to integrate their app into the EHR platform. So as many of you probably have gone to, a new provider and had to fill out new patient paperwork, that's just transcription again. You're putting information on a paper that's given to a support staff, a scribe, a medical assistant, a patient care tech, who is then manually taking what's on that paper and entering it into the EHR. That does not give you a voice into what's being put into the EHR system. TheraCare AI, with this integration into these EHR systems, is allowing you to be the person who's inputting your medications into that EHR system. And Kevin mentioned the ability to scan a bottle. I'm aging. My vision is going, as with my glasses here. It's very difficult sometimes to even read what's on your pill bottles. So having that camera to scan your medication pills and have it bring up exactly what you're taking and something that you can see and read, well, that alone will help reduce errors because you may have misread what you were taking and don't know. So the TheraCare AI app not only helps you generate an accurate medication list, but some of the biggest medication errors we see in the healthcare system is when a patient, like my aunt, is admitted to the hospital and then transitions back to home. Hospital systems have different formularies. And so, for example, she takes a cholesterol medicine. She may be on atorvastatin or Lipitor at home, but the hospital system has Crestor or Rosuvastatin on their formulary. They would switch out that medication, so she would take the hospital formulary instead of the one she was taking at home. When she got back to her group home, if someone wasn't aware or was able to do medication reconciliation, they may not know that these two medications were in the same class, and taking both of them could have serious health consequences for her. By having the integration, you're able to see in real time what is in your list, and you can correct those medication errors. From a provider standpoint, it saves me time by having that med rec that's highlighting the errors that are occurring. So when you come for that hospital follow-up appointment, I know the things I need to address with you right off the get-go. Have you been taking both of these cholesterol medicines? And open the discussion and the dialogue between the patient and the provider, which is really the source of care. So I'm extremely excited with the work that TheraCare is doing to enable patients to regain their voice and what their medication list is to help reduce the unnecessary medication errors that happen every single day. We really appreciate, Nicole, you having us here, and we open it to any, questions that you may have about what we're doing.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You couldn't see me as you were presenting, but I'm here shaking my head. Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. With so many of the things that you were talking about in that discussion. So yeah, thinking about all those opportunities when, somebody to build out that baseline that you talked about. And then when you go into the health system and the changes in the medication and the naming and the formularies, and then when you're going back home and trying to realize and reconcile that's a lot for people to do with epilepsy or without, right? Across the board, in all areas of life. So that is just, I'm applauding all of the work that you guys are doing in piloting this. So tell me a little bit about, in looking at this, what a person can do today. So really today, anybody can download this. This is available for the platform. Somebody can download, correct?
Correct.
And start to build out your baseline.
Yeah, that's a great first step.
Yeah, and
once you have that,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Shannon.
No, once you have that baseline, then you have something consistent that you can compare things to when you look at those discharge summaries, when you look at those clinical, summaries you get after your visits with the provider.
Yes, amazing. And so today, if are we integrated to a point that we can communicate with those? It's typically Athena, right? Athena or the other one that you mentioned here in
Epic is one of the big ones in our healthcare system. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So are we integrated to a point that we can communicate now with those EHR systems to download into TheraCare, or is that something yet to come?
Well, we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
Health
I just want to
systems
be realistic. Yeah.
health systems are very protective of their data, and that's really the core challenge.
Sure.
We're in those ongoing conversations with some of the more prominent EHR providers about building those direct integrations. The goal is for TheraCare to pull these patient records automatically and send those verified reconciliation reports right back into the system. The technology to do this exists, but talking through the partnership agreements and getting buy-in from the health system level is where the real work is, and that just takes some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand that from both sides.
And I think too, in the conversations that I had with these EHR providers, that the buy-in is going to be there for them as well, because medication errors in a hospital system equate to big dollars. They
Yeah.
don't want medication errors to happen. So when you put the patient back in the seat of having a voice in healthcare, you're going to reduce errors, and that helps not just the patient, but it helps the hospital systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Can see that 100%. So a great use of AI, right? Making
Mhm.
this uniquely suited for medication reconciliation. Amazing to be launching that with that technology. And I think you've given some really valuable examples specifically related to epilepsy with your aunt, right? That as a parent sitting here listening to that as you were sharing that story, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. And thinking about as our children grow and then learn to advocate for themselves. And you're right. And sometimes when you're in that health situation, it's overwhelming, or you've had seizures. And so cognitively, you just aren't able to evaluate and make, advocate for yourself in those ways. So a tool like this would be so instrumental in helping people provide that
Yeah,
information.
I agree. Medication data is extremely messy. The same drug can show up under a brand name, a
Yeah.
generic label, or even a different dosage form. A human manually sorting through these records from three different health systems, they're going to miss some things. AI is built and it can process all of that very quickly. It can normalize the data and it can flag mismatching records in seconds. And so it's not replacing the clinical judgment, but it's making sure the clinician has the accurate information to work with in the first place.
Yeah, I can see that. And again, then on the outside of that, when they're discharged and that the patient has the right information to reconcile what transpired during a stay, or, if a medication was changed when you're working with your providers, et cetera, I can see that that would be so helpful. And then tracking historically, like you said, right? That
Mhm.
historical tracking is so valuable. So
Yeah,
you
and
talk,
TheraCare also has the ability to where you can, say I had muscle aches when I took this medication and track your side effects. So you can have a historical database when you go to your provider saying, hey, every time I took this medication at this time, this is the symptom I experienced. And all of this just opens the dialogue, again, giving a patient back their voice.
yeah, absolutely. And also just capturing that information real time as it's happening. But then, like you said, you have it historically. It takes us leaps and bounds from when I was helping navigate this for my daughter when our journey started over 14 years ago, and just having a notebook and writing everything down, trying
Right.
to
Yeah.
track every medication change, every side effect that she shared, or any of the, yeah, just leaps and bounds ahead of that. So grateful for that. One of the things that you mentioned about, patient advocacy. So a patient obviously can build this, download it, start building for themselves. But then if they wanted to help encourage or maybe move the needle forward with their clinic or their provider, how can they otherwise advocate for the use of this going forward? Any
Yeah,
ideas?
I think this is a good starting point to open a discussion. But sometimes, I find even myself having all this experience in the healthcare system, when it was my aunt that was a patient or myself as a patient, kind of things go blank in your head. You're vulnerable, you're emotional, you don't feel well. So taking a patient advocate with you to be a second set of eyes and ears and to help kind of be your voice. And the beauty of patient advocacy is that advocates aim to understand who you are and what it is you want to convey to the healthcare community, and just give you the opportunity and to be that voice so you're heard and your wishes are heard.
That's amazing. And does every health system provide a patient advocate, or is that something they need to bring alongside with them, or is that the role of a parent or a caregiver or another family member? What does that
Yeah,
look?
great question. So insurance companies, healthcare systems often have a term called care navigators. Sometimes they'll call them patient advocates. But the real difference between a care navigator and a patient advocate is a care navigator is embedded in the system that you're in. So not that they have ill intentions, but they are in a system that is outside of you as the patient. An independent patient advocate, their only focus is you as the patient. Their mission is to make sure you understand your diagnoses, your treatments, what's being discussed, and that you are able to make truly informed decisions with all the information, not just what may the healthcare system is giving you.
Wonderful. And if someone were looking for a patient advocate, that independent, if they needed that, because I do know a lot of people live on their own or maybe don't have family and friends that can help fill that role, how do they find a service like that?
Yeah, certainly they can come to our service advocate. There's also the Greater National Advocate website, GNA, which lists all patient advocates across the country who it's a free service to patient advocates to upload their profile. So you can search that website by specific disease, by geographic location, and it will match you to an advocate in your area who has expertise in the field that you need.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So really, yeah, looking to the future and thinking about, coordinated care and helping, again, that advocacy role. What do you think how does this help move that? What do you think the impact is here for both advocacy and the TheraCare program?
Yeah, I think the beauty of TheraCare AI is that it's not isolated to AI technology, but it is taking the patient experience and the role of advocacy in its development and refinement. So in doing that, I personally feel it is truly for the first time with this, ability to potentially integrate into EHR systems, allowing a patient to be part of their EHR record. Kevin mentioned that health systems are protective of that data. When you say that out loud, that's crazy. It's your data. It's your information that you are putting into the system, and you have no way to control it. For my, Aunt Christy, we couldn't change those medication errors. We called the hospital system. We said, these are wrong. But once you have that discharge paperwork in hand, that, transactional care is signed off by the providers who were involved in the care, and they're not going to unlock and amend that note to create medication errors at that time. So those errors will keep on getting pushed through your EHR record until you revisit that system and a new note is pulled up and a new support staff, a patient care tech, a scribe, whoever, starts going through and rebuilding a new medication list. And they have to have, the caring and notice that something is wrong. But again, that new visit could be started again by an ER visit. And so you're running into the same barriers to correct that medication list. So this really is a huge game changer for a patient to control their data finally.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. So as we start to wrap up and kind of close out, what do you each think are some of the key takeaways that you want our audience to understand and to know going forward?
Yeah. The biggest thing that I've learned through my time of working on this TheraCare project and in the pilot with Advocate is that most people and patients they assume that because something is in their medical record that it must be correct, but oftentimes that's not the case. Records get outdated, medications get missed, and like no single provider always has the full picture. And so having a tool like this where you can track live data and any changes that are made right at your fingertips is a huge important thing that we're working on, and it's hopefully going to solve some of these big issues that are coming up and eliminate some of these medication errors that are still prevalent in the electronic health records.
Awesome.
I don't have much to contribute to what Kevin said. I think he kind of gave a nice summary there. But I think for patient advocacy, it's always back to the mission is to empower the patient. And right now, you're pretty vulnerable when it comes to medication reconciliation.
Awesome. Well, again, I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing and for bringing this forward and sharing this information with us today. I think it's a great example of innovation and patient advocacy and the connection point there, improving our healthcare systems. I think that's going to be amazing. So medication safety is not just a technical issue, as we've heard, it's a human one. Bridging system gaps requires both innovative tools and that lived experience. So thank you again, Shannon and Kevin, for being part of the Epilepsy Innovation Conference. And thank you to our viewers. We hope that this presentation not only provides a practical information, but also offers reassurance that innovation is actively underway across healthcare systems and new designs being developed to close the gaps and create safer, more connected care.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be with you today, and we really appreciate personally all the work that the Epilepsy Foundation does for those who, have epilepsy.
Thank you, and thank you both.
As we wrap up today's conference, I want to say thank you once more for being here. And we hope that you're not only leaving with new knowledge, but with a greater sense of possibility. And so we also want to extend some invitations to you, ways that you can continue to be involved in this great epilepsy community at the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan. So in a few moments, you will see some slides, and there are many opportunities to engage with us, to learn more, to grow, to build community. So perhaps it's attending one of our strolls for epilepsy this summer. Maybe it's sending a child with epilepsy to kids camp or coming as a whole family for family camp. Maybe it's participating in weekly support groups or our community book club. Perhaps it involves getting certified in seizure recognition and first aid, or accessing resources like our Emergency Medication Assistance Fund when that support is needed. These programs exist because of our community, because of people like you. And so we encourage you to visit our website, that's www.epilepsymichigan.org, and to stay connected with us beyond today. So thank you for being a part of our conference. And we know that innovation and technology and advocacy continue to shape our future together. And I hope that you can not only learn innovation, you can be a part of it. And so with that, we also want to thank our sponsor once more. A large thank you to Corewell Health for making today possible. It means the world to us and our community. And we hope that you're leaving with practical insights. And as you do that, please know we are here for you. You can reach out to us at any time. And thank you for being a part of this conference today. Take care.